Welcome to Sheffy's Sandbox. I'm your host, April Scheffler, and today I'm joined by a very articulate champion for human beings, Maritza Mejia. Around 40 minutes into the conversation, I used the word poised instead of posed, and the universe revolted. The second half of the audio is fraught with issues where the audio just doesn't sync up. I've reported the issue to Anchor FM, and I'm waiting to see if there's a possible fix. But in the meantime, I've done my best to edit the conversation. Still, you'll hear her give responses before I've even asked questions, and many times where the unsynced audio, it has us talking over each other. I apologize in advance for the cringe-worthy technical difficulties of the second half, but I think if you are able to power through, you'll glean quite a bit from this insightful conversation with Maritza. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us in Sheffy's Sandbox. Today we invite you to play with us and our guest, Maritza Mejia. Welcome, Maritza.
Hi, good to be here.
And I did pronounce your name correctly?
Yeah, you did it perfectly.
Okay. Well, the first segment is Let's Grab Coffee, because we know that a good majority of people can't operate without coffee. So in this segment, we pop into a virtual coffee house before hitting the beach. And being the benevolent hosts that we are, your order is on us. So what order do you give the barista?
Well, if we're going to the beach, I'm definitely going for something iced. And my favorite is always an iced green tea. I love I actually am really sensitive to caffeine, but I love a green tea, especially if it's like a mango or like a passion fruit green tea. I'm in.
Have you found that your sensitivity to caffeine has become more pronounced with age? Not that you're old. I think we're the same age, but
I turned 40 this year. I'm in November. It will be my 40th birthday. Yeah, you're so right about that. It has gotten more pronounced. Like I always have had a lot of energy, and now, when I was growing up, being diagnosed as ADHD was not a thing, but now that I'm older, I'm like, oh, that's probably what was going on with me. And caffeine just exacerbates it. So but I've noticed it much more now as I'm older. So I'll drink coffee maybe once or twice a month, because on the days when I drink coffee, I am up all night, even if I've had it in the morning. So, but green tea, I don't know, I'm less sensitive with that. So, I'll have a green tea maybe once a week.
Usually.
How about you? Are you a coffee person?
I am. I was not growing up or, even in my 20s, but I'd say in the last couple of years, I started drinking coffee. And I have a personal limit where I have a cutoff time around noon. Mm-hmm. Like I can't drink any caffeine after that, or I have difficulty falling asleep even, with my Ambien. So we only allow unfamous people on this podcast. So we need to determine whether or not you're too famous for us or not. What could be your claims to fame?
Oh, well, I am definitely not even close to being famous in any way whatsoever. Maybe the most famous I've ever been is when I was in Santa Barbara, where I lived for most of my life. I was the guest on because I had done a couple of keynote speeches in Santa Barbara, and I was the guest on a very local, like low budget show on education, because that was the field that I was working in at the time. And the entire half hour, the host was mispronouncing my name left and right and really had no idea what I was doing. So anyone who knew me, who watched it, thought it was pretty hilarious. I had no business being on that show. I really, but I do have a recording of it, and every once in a while I'll let someone see it because it's just too funny.
Well, also we have a game. We love games on this show, and this was linguistic tag. Guests are asked to choose a word or phrase that they would like to hear used more often in everyday conversation. Something that doesn't get enough play, enough airtime. And the prior guest kind of went off script a little bit and chose a phrase And you having heard it, you probably know it's inner wisdom is the
Yes,
phrase.
I
So
heard. Yes.
you are tasked to try to somehow fit that into our conversation today. And
Okay.
then you also get to choose a word for the next guest to dance with. It could be a peculiar word that you find funny or just that resonates
hmm
with you. So, what are you laying down for them to pick up?
Well, my favorite underused word is Schadenfreude. I believe it's a German word, and it's actually a very snarky word, and yeah, I hope it doesn't reflect too poorly on my personality, but Schadenfreude is to take pleasure in someone else's downfall. So like, if someone you don't like gets in legal trouble or does a speech with their fly down or something like that. And if you take any pleasure in it, that's called Schadenfreude. And it's sort of this delicious pleasure, which is very snarky and not how I try to live my life, but I think it's a great word.
Well, I was having a conversation with my husband earlier today, and it seems that sometimes people are polarized on an issue. Not every issue, obviously, but some issues, it's just because they're oblivious to their own shadow. And they're
Mm,
like, I don't think along these lines because, you know, I'm not evil.
uh-huh.
But people, in doing so, they kind of, I don't know, decline, they're not, uh, they're not saying that they're capable of feeling
Mm,
uh, these more shadow aspects. Like,
hmm
what was the word you used again?
Schadenfreude.
Schadenfreude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right about that. And I think that this piece about being aware of your shadow is a beautiful way to help people see that their impact is there, and that they're whether they would like to or not impact other pieces around them, that impact is happening. And certainly with everything, all the discourse that's happening right now about racial issues, I mean, that couldn't be a more pertinent thing to be talking about. So
Hmm.
can see how it's coming up.
Well, before we talk about how we met, tell us a little bit about your life growing up and um, your roles in your career. Have you always wanted to help people?
Yeah, well, I grew up, I was born in Orange County, California, but my parents are immigrants. My mom's from Mexico and my dad's from Colombia. And I grew up in the 80s. And in California in the 80s, there was, and nationally, but particularly in California, there were a lot of anti-immigrant sentiments happening. We had an incredibly racist governor as I was growing up, and I remember being polarized even as like a little kid. I remember my parents had gotten their green cards, but they hadn't become citizens yet, so they weren't able to vote, and they became citizens just so they could vote in the election and vote out the racist governor that we had for a long time. And so I remember becoming like very aware that there was privilege with where you were born, because since I was a U.S. citizen and my cousins were not, some of my cousins were undocumented because they came literally just 3 or 4 years after my parents came to the United States. But that was a world of difference. They were treated very differently. Their opportunities and possibilities were very different, and yet we were all the same. I was very aware that I was no better than they were, and just merely because of the way that the laws favored me and gave me privilege, I had a very different outcome in my life, and I was really determined to spend my life's work doing that. So I became an activist when I was about 17. I started going to marches, and a lot of the work that I did in California was related to helping immigrants access fair treatment, whether that was in the schools or, um, in receiving other kinds of rights, and bringing light to the immigration system. I think a lot of people were like, well, you're legal, to use that phrase, which I don't like, but your family has their papers. Like, why can't other people do that? And I think people don't realize that the immigration system really limits most immigrants from standing in any kind of line. People say, get in line and do it the right way. Well, there is no line, and that building has no windows and no doors for a lot of immigrants. I work with people who have been trying to become legalized citizens or have their green cards for over 20 years and have been working hard and have a lot of integrity and ethics. And so anyway, that was that was a majority of the work that I did in California, and for the last couple of years I've been working with young people who are all working to end extreme global poverty, and I'm still doing some immigrant rights work and grassroots organizing as well.
I'm always interested in how people begin these careers or how they get their foot in the door. Whenever you graduated high school, what was the next step? Like, did you go to college and get a degree, or?
Yeah, I have, I went to UC Santa Barbara. So I grew up in Orange County, and my parents are super strict, very like conservative values, very Catholic. I'm the oldest in my family, and being a girl, I was told, they wanted me to get educated. That was a real priority. Like, my dad moved to this country because he wanted to go to college, and he never was able to make that dream come true. It was just too difficult as an undocumented person. But for us kids, it was a huge goal. And so they really wanted me to go to college, but they also were kind of stuck with this, like, but we really don't want you to leave the house. And so what they wanted me to do was commute to the University of California, Irvine, which was just down the street from where I grew up. And my mom was like, we can carpool every day. That was just not the college experience that I wanted, because I was just ready to get out of the house. I felt very confined, and was really ready for something different. So I pretended to apply to UCI, and I pretended to get rejected. And instead I got into UC Santa Barbara, which was about 2.5 hours away from where I grew up. And that was just the right distance. And so I literally went to that school without ever having visited. I knew nothing about it. I hardly knew anyone who was going to that school, but it was freedom. And I majored in global studies because I knew that I was going to want to work towards this kind of work. I didn't know exactly in what parameter. At the time, I actually thought I was going to be a journalist. But I majored in global studies, and my senior year of college was when 9/11 happened, right as my senior year was starting. And so the global landscape became really, really important to a lot of people, and to me as well. And so then I knew I was going to want to continue on in nonprofit work. And to me, so much of the global issues that we are seeing and have been seeing for these past 20 years are really quite rooted in American sentiment and American policies. And so I had, a shift, because I had thought I was going to be doing this work in other countries, but I pretty quickly realized there's a lot of work to do here in the United States to change our policies, and that will impact global tragedy and global war pretty significantly. So I got my master's degree in public administration, and I started working first in higher education and then in the nonprofit sector in Santa Barbara.
Higher education, where did you work?
Yeah, so I worked at UC Santa Barbara, which was just, it's an incredible place. It really is. I think of Santa Barbara as being the love of my life. I grew up there, and after graduation, I never would have imagined that I would stay, but just one job led to another, and I was able to make a great community there. And so I worked at UC Santa Barbara. I was working at the time with the students who lived on campus, and I did a lot of my social justice. The first steps I took into working professionally with social justice related issues were with those students, because there was a lot of cross-cultural communication. We did a lot of social justice trainings. The students, being between 18 and 22, those years are very formative for people to really start to explore their own identities. And so there was a lot of really great work to do with students as they were, for the first time, examining, like, what does it mean to be a person of color? What does it mean to be a first generation person, or a Black person, or someone who identifies as LGBT, or, like, all of that work was really empowering and wonderful. And I feel like I learned so much from my students about being an ally and being an advocate. And also, it was still pretty, that this was when I was in my early 20s as well. So I was also, very much still exploring who I was and what that meant, and how I would proceed with my career. So originally, I left UC Santa Barbara because I didn't have my master's degree yet. And when you work in higher ed, it's very difficult to move up in the university without having a master's degree as a minimum. And so I originally left to pursue my master's degree. But then once I got started in the nonprofit world, I worked at a really great college access foundation in Santa Barbara. But that was where all of a sudden I was moved to action in the community, because I was going out into the high schools and I was promoting going to college, and I was offering scholarships. So it was like this incredible opportunity that the place where I worked had over $8 million of scholarships to offer to the county students every single year. And it was just nothing but great news. And so I would go to all of these high school students and I would talk to them about my own journey, being a first generation college student, being the child of immigrants, and how my parents wanted this for me, but they, had no idea how to help me, and about how their, possibility of going to college is there, even if they may not exactly know how to do it. Like, we were there to support them. And then I would have undocumented students who would come up to me after the presentation and would say, oh, like, I'm so glad to hear about this. Like, I really need this support. And unfortunately, at the time, the policy at that foundation where I worked was that undocumented students were not allowed to receive scholarships. And so I would be saying, like, there's $8 million of scholarships. And behind the scenes, I knew that there were lots of students who were not as qualified as these undocumented students who were showing up and they were getting scholarships. But these undocumented students were getting turned away without ever having even a chance to put their foot in the door. And so at that point, my friends and I decided that we were going to do whatever we could to start our own scholarship, and then someday hope that scholarship would get included in with the foundation and be a part of what they offered, so that students wouldn't be getting the door shut on them every time that they tried to come in. And so we started our own 501c3, and we thought, okay, we thought in our first year, maybe $10,000. Like, we would go and just ask our friends, we would contribute ourselves, things like that. And we thought maybe we'll gather $10,000 together. But people, when they see other people working really hard and having such good intentions, like our students did, like, they truly just wanted to work hard and be stable in their lives and have some glimmer of an opportunity for the future. And instead of raising $10,000 in our first year, we raised $17,000. And then the next year we raised over $50,000. And then the next year we raised over $100,000. And that was such an incredible learning time for me, because I was like, oh, like, you just have to give people the opportunity to do the right thing, and so many people will surprise you. And I had to confront my own biases. Like, I'm Latinx, and I'm really proud of being a brown person, and I don't have a choice but to look brown and look like I am not a white person. And I, all of my life, had this like very strong bias that it was sort of like you can't count on white people to step up for brown people. But in fundraising for our 501c3 and for our scholarships, I had to confront that because the people who were stepping up time and time again were often white people, and often white people who had no direct tie to their immigrant background. They weren't like first generation or something like that. Their immigrant background was many, many generations before. And so it gave me a gift. Like this experience was a real eye opener that like to make real change, you have to enlist all parties, and you can't just decide that you're gonna shut out people of any race or color who want to help you, or even have like a real predetermined idea of how you're going to get somewhere, because the right people will show up and you have to be open to them. That nonprofit that we started was called ADSUM Education Foundation, and ADSUM is Latin for I am here. And we named it that because the students would say to us, like, I feel invisible. I've been going to school with these other people for all these years that I've been here in the United States, and they have no idea I'm undocumented. Some of them actually didn't even know that they were undocumented until it came time to be 16 and go get your driver's license. And then they realized, their parents would be like, I have something to tell you, you actually are not documented. They had come, some of them had come so young. So our whole goal was to fundraise scholarships so that there would always be scholarships for undocumented persons at this other foundation that was much, much bigger than we were. And in 2016, we were able to have our biggest victory, which was not a fundraising victory. It was the victory of the doors of the other foundations in Santa Barbara opening their criteria to allow undocumented students to compete for scholarships. So now, if you are an undocumented student in Santa Barbara, you actually are have a potential pool of over $8 million a year of scholarships. And you can compete with other students for that money based on your merit. And that's what we were really pushing for. And since we were able to see that policy change happened, we were never trying to be in competition with the other foundation. We were just trying to get equal rights. And since we did that, we actually dissolved our foundation so that our supporters now, like we gave all of our supporters over to the other foundation. So folks who had been giving us money now give it directly to that foundation, and that foundation chooses the best student.
And what is the name of that foundation again? I can put a link in our show notes.
The Scholarship Foundation of Santa Barbara. Yeah. So they are now able to support many different kinds of students, including undocumented students. Yeah.
What would you say to people who are not as excited about what you do, saying that if they're undocumented, they're not paying taxes, and they're not wanting to give these financial resources to people who are not going to be pulling their own weight when it comes to tax burden?
Gotcha.
I'm sure you've heard that a lot.
Yeah.
What do you say to those people?
Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation about how undocumented persons survive in our country. Undocumented persons actually do pay taxes. They pay an enormous amount of taxes, and without their contributions, in particular to the Social Security system, those systems would probably crumble. They subsidize, like the system banks on these undocumented persons contributing, but never being able to withdraw, which many of them will never be able to withdraw. They also pay taxes every time they make a purchase, and that's significant. Their purchases and their purchasing power is fueling our infrastructure. And not only that, for many, many undocumented persons, if they aren't working a job that's over the table, if they're working under the table, let's say, then maybe they're not contributing to Social Security, but they are, still subsidizing our lives in many different ways. For example, the folks who work under the table and work in the fields. It is extremely rare for those workers to get paid a fair wage, to be paid a minimum wage. They are often abused by the employers who hire them because they don't have any other options. So they're willing to work for $5 an hour, or sometimes even less. Sometimes they work by the amount that they pick, which, they'll get paid a certain amount of money, let's say $10 for picking a barrel full of something. And that works out to sometimes literally $2 or $3 an hour because of the work. And that subsidizes, that might not be a tax that they pay, but that subsidizes our ability to go into a grocery store year round and have crops that are very labor intensive at a very reasonable rate. If we didn't have this permanent underclass of workers, we would see a crumbling in the economy of not only our agricultural system, but our hospitality industries, restaurant industries. These are all built on the backs of immigrant laborers. And if we are willing to say that these folks are a detriment to being here, then we need to also be willing to say that we are going to change every single part of our lifestyle. If we don't have undocumented persons here in our country, then we will need to pay extraordinarily higher prices for nearly every single thing that we enjoy, including all of the services that we might have in our home. If we have landscapers or cleaners or anything like that, if you ever go on vacation, that's going to cost a lot more. And so if we're saying that, if that's what we're willing to do to boot out undocumented persons, then we have to also be willing to pay the price in that way. And certainly, I think a lot of Americans are not, who are against immigration reform and who are against undocumented persons having rights, are not really taking into account how much of their own quality of life is really built around these pieces. And so when you ask folks to give undocumented persons rights, for example, undocumented persons can't access emergency measures. They didn't get an economic stimulus check. They don't qualify for many of the public services that legalized citizens can qualify for. When we're asking for that, we're just simply asking for them to have a safety net so they can survive. And especially since COVID has happened, we have seen that the undocumented populations have suffered at much greater rates than other parts of the population, because they really have no safety net at all. If their under the table job has ceased, they can't access unemployment. They can't access emergency medical services. They can't, there's a lot of ways that population is really suffering. So, I mean, there's just so much. And I think people really do have a lot of misinformation about the contributions that undocumented persons make to their lives every single day.
And I know you have some international experience. So, is it a mutually beneficial relationship? Like, even if they're only getting paid $5 an hour, which seems crazy, is that still better than where they've immigrated from?
Oftentimes, it's significantly better. And it just depends. Like we have seen, President Obama instituted a lot of deportations and made policies, some policies that really benefited young immigrants, but also some policies that really made it difficult for folks to stay. And so we saw a lot of immigrants leave the United States during Obama's terms. And then now under the current administration, we've also seen there's been a lot of different policies that have also pushed immigrants back to their home countries. So it just depends, like on which country you're thinking of. But like, for example, and you know, many immigrants have left because they have assessed that the situation here is no longer worth it. And so you'll see, like, if you were to look up Georgia farmers uniting for immigrants, you'll find some really amazing articles where in different parts of the country, some farmers are really saying, like, we can't keep doing this and losing our labor. Like, our industry is going to go under. And because, yeah, some immigrants have decided that it's actually become too difficult here, and it might be easier to do things back home. But
where they wouldn't be receiving the same type of second
exactly.
class
Yep.
treatment.
But there are other parts of Latin America in particular where it is not better. Like, for example, in Venezuela right now, we're seeing one of the largest refugee crises that's ever been experienced. It's on its way to surpass Syria's refugee crisis. Their economy has completely crumbled. So people like you and me, April, who like enjoy our lives, like we can go grocery shopping whenever we want to. We can access things that we need pretty easily. They literally went from living how you and I live to, within just a couple of years, because of their economy crumbling, they now are completely faced with a food shortage. They have no idea where their next meal is coming from. There are towns where you literally only can have water coming through your pipes one day a month. And so people on that one day will fill up every single bucket and vessel that they can with water, and then they will use that for the entire rest of the month. And these are people who had lived not in poverty just 2 or 3 years ago, but now are subsisting. Like, I was reading a statistic where 90% of Venezuelans adults said that they have to go without food for at least one day a week, because there is just such incredible poverty and shortage, because of corruption, because of economic policies, because of they had an economic meltdown and their money is worth nothing. Like, the average Venezuelan makes what it would cost to buy 2 watermelons in an entire month of work. So there's just there's good reasons why people are leaving their countries, and so even making $5 a day here is and having access to running water, having access to food as long as you can keep working. That's a dream come true for many of the countries that we see people fleeing from right now.
My brother and I, we had gone on a short-term mission trip to help build some churches in rural Venezuela. So, yeah, okay, 98 or 99, when we went, people that, of course, again, it was rural, and we were there because they weren't in the best of financial shape. So I'm just wondering to myself whether or not they were actually poised, to handle the crisis better, because they
Right.
already didn't have money, and they were already having to deal with collecting rainwater and feeding the pigs that they would slaughter and so forth.
Yeah, I do
I don't
think that
know.
it is likely. And I mean, isn't it funny? It's not funny. Like, it's not funny. I shouldn't say that. But isn't it interesting that when COVID was happening, a lot of Americans, and like myself included and my family included, we started growing crops too, because we were like, hey, we should be able to survive if something were to happen. And like, we weren't going to have access to food. And there was all the people like learning to bake bread, and everybody was like buying seeds to plant tomatoes and other kinds of vegetables and whatever. And I
humans can be
Yes.
so adaptable as long as they're
Yes.
not trying to destroy each other. They can
Yes. And so,
handle
yeah, I
almost
do. I feel
anything.
like the people you might know in rural parts of Venezuela probably were. I think you're so right. I think they probably were positioned in a much better way to deal with what's happening. They were already so off the grid, it's, but here, like, I mean, just like we saw with COVID, if you live in an urban part of the United States, you are 9 days away from not having food. If something were to happen, if we were to be in some sort of catastrophic situation where farmers were no longer able to distribute food, you are not, if you depend on your grocery store for food, you are 9 days away in an emergency from not being able to access any food for your family.
I That is so interesting. I had a neighbor that we had a
Mm-hmm.
community. It was
Uh-huh.
called Nextdoor. So the Nextdoor
Yeah.
app, I think enough people are familiar with that. Um, I One of my neighbors had posted on there saying that if anyone wanted to know how
Mm-hmm.
to learn how to start growing their own food,
Yep.
that she had seedlings. And so you could just text her your address,
Mm-hmm.
because of the COVID-19 thing, she
Mm-hmm.
could just leave it on your front porch, and you could text her with any issues you have about it's not growing right, or I need to put it in a more shady area.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought that was really cool, and I'm hoping maybe I can get her on the podcast for an interview
Yeah.
about how more people can start grassroots programs like that. And maybe your scope is not the
Right.
whole world, but just your neighborhood, and you can be that point of contact where if you do have a green thumb, you can teach those of us who
Yep. Me
just
too.
seem to kill plants, like like, what am I doing wrong, and how do I know when
Mm-hmm.
it's ready to actually harvest? If
Yep.
it just keeps growing, how do I know? you know Things that, because we have become so
Mm-hmm.
disconnected from growing our own food, that I thought that was very, very cool of her, to get that
Mm-hmm.
grassroots neighborhood thing going. And so I have killed several of the seedlings, but there's still there's still a plant,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't even know what it is, because the marker
Oh,
got
yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it faded with the rain. But at least I know there's some
Oh, that's
food
so
item growing.
funny. Yeah, it is a really wonderful thing to pick up. I feel like that's such a lost skill that is just so, it's so great for so many reasons. I mean, just the kids, I live with my sister and her family, and the kids are, there's a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 13-year-old, and they actually just this morning had their first 4 tomatoes that were big enough to pick off of the vine, and they were so excited about that. I mean, just being able to connect them with the way
Hmm.
that processes, like the way that this all works and the way that we're connected to our food, I think is a really incredible lesson too, to learn early on. Like these foods don't just grow in the supermarket, they actually come from somewhere, and there's this army of people who contribute to what shows up on your table.
Okay, so let's go back to 2016, when your nonprofit dissolved. Is that when you went on to something different, or had you already begun
Yeah, so
another endeavor
I
before then?
when we had AdSum Education Foundation up and running, we were always all volunteer. So I never worked for that foundation. I was a founder and I was on the board um, from the time we became a 501(c)(3) until we dissolved it. But I never worked there. So I always had a day job. And at the time, in 2016, my day job was still at UC Santa Barbara. But because I went back to UCSB after I worked at the Scholarship Foundation. But then the next year, I started working with Feel Good, and Feel Good is the incredible nonprofit that I work with now that supports undocumented, I'm sorry, does not support undocumented students. What it does is work with college students across the United States and Canada. And all of the college students are volunteers who are working to end extreme global poverty. So They do fundraisers on their campuses, and they contribute 100% of their money to ending extreme global poverty. And since our inception as an organization, these students have fundraised over $2 million. So they've contributed in that way, but they also are learning about all these wonderful factors that you and I have been talking about, and how they come together to create solutions for ending extreme global poverty. So they learn about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and as they're in college and universities, and our goal is that as they graduate and go on to careers in any industry, they will make decisions with this mindset, this global mindset, that the way they spend their money, the way they donate their money, the way that they contribute to the world, all has a role in ending extreme global poverty. And we consider ourselves in the business of mobilizing change makers. So it's a really wonderful organization, and I've been with them for the past few years. And yeah, I could talk for hours about them. I just am so grateful to be in this role and to get to work with these college students every day.
Okay. And how do they learn about the global poverty? Do they actually visit and do some volunteer work in these other countries, or is it more
Mhm.
of just staying home
It's
and
such a good question.
learning
Yeah,
remotely?
it's such a good question, because we really do. We do not have a philosophy of sending students to other countries. The way that they contribute is they give all of the money that they've fundraised to 4 NGOs that are doing the work abroad, because we really believe in community-led development. So, for example, we work with an incredible organization that's working to end hunger, and they have eight countries around the world. Well, I'm sorry, not they don't have just 8 countries, but they're working with different countries around the world. And we will have conferences where students can attend here in the United States, and they'll meet with a representative who brings the work to them. But in the country, so let's say the work that they're
Mm.
doing in Mexico, for example, they only employ Mexicans who live there. They employ people who will be able to stay with the solutions long term. They only work with a country if their government will also be a part of the work and also invest in the work. Because what they're looking to do is let that community say what's going to work there, and let that community also invest, so that long term there's a real sustainable solution that's being adopted. And so we do often have students who do internships or things like that, or actually we have some alumni who go on to work for these organizations, which is really wonderful. But for most of our students, the way that they interact with that work is not necessarily in the country.
When it comes to accountability for the funds that are
Mm-hmm.
raised and how these communities use it, I guess that would just go to who gets
Mm-hmm.
picked for those 4 NGOs each year, right? So if they're giving their money to communities that are squandering the funds, then I guess y'all would
Yeah,
just
so
pick a
the
different NGO the
NGOs that
next
we
year.
work with
Or,
are really carefully vetted. We try to make sure that they are doing a lot of oversight. So they're not just sending the money to, Honduras and telling them to like do whatever they want with it. They are like really, they have people who work for them in that country who are employees of that NGO, but they live there, and they are from that country, and they're planning to build their life there. So mhm,
so hopefully they're very
exactly.
invested
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
success
And
of
there's a
their
lot of oversight,
people.
and there's a lot of reporting, and assessing, because I think that that's difficult to do long range for a lot of these projects. So there has to be like, okay, we can make a plan for the next 1 to 3 years, but we can't necessarily make a plan for the next 15 years until we see how these first 3 years go. And so there's a lot of oversight in that way. but the steering is happening in the country by the people who the NGO employs and are full employees of that NGO.
If you're like me and you've wanted to make a podcast ever since podcasts became a thing, then I encourage you to check out Anchor. Anchor is what I use to create podcasts. I always thought I didn't have the know-how or the resources to create a podcast. The research made it all feel too overwhelming, and then I discovered Anchor. It's free, easy. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. You travel so much. Like, I'll be texting you, oh, you want to do something this weekend? Oh, no, I'm in California, or I'm meeting with this, doing this conference here. So what is
I'm the
your
executive
role with
director of
Feel
Feel
Good
Good,
right now?
and because we have 25 chapters across the United States and Canada, I am lucky enough to get to go visit my students often, and they're kind of spread all over, and so that's a significant part of my travel. And then the other part of my travel is actually because I sit on the board of an organization called Witness for Peace. And Witness for Peace does a lot of work in Latin America. And so in the past year, I've been able to travel with them. We do work, the organization does work at the US-Mexico border. So the whole purpose of Witness for Peace is to show Americans how their American tax dollars are being used to impact and influence policies in Latin America. And so we bring delegations of people. For example, there's a delegation that went to the US-Mexico border in Arizona and encamped in the desert to see how their US tax dollars are being spent to protect the border, but also went to the detainment centers to see how their US tax dollars are being used to, in many cases, keep immigrants in these really insane conditions that really don't meet the standards of what I think a lot of Americans would expect. Seeing people being held in pens outside in the Arizona heat for 20 hours a day without any access to a bathroom, things like that. Like just the witnessing that's happening is really impactful to, I think, a lot of Americans who had no idea that this is how our American government is treating humans. And then there's a delegation that I went to Colombia with, because a significant part of our work right now is also in Colombia, where US tax dollars are being used to, I'm using air quotes here, fight the war on drugs. But in reality, a lot of human rights abuses are also happening with that money. And so going down to Colombia to witness is actually a protection measure, because when we go to witness, the folks who are the good guys down there, who are actually trying to fight the corruption and actually trying to make sure that there's not any human rights abuses being made, those people, those good guys, are under threat 24 hours a day, and need bodyguards and things like that. But when you're there as a Witness for Peace delegate, you've registered with the State Department. The whole country, it knows that you're there. You're wearing your Witness for Peace shirt. And so by you just simply being there as an American, you actually offer a sort of a safety bubble of protection to these people who are working really hard to end the humanitarian rights abuses. And because if anything were to happen while we were there, it would flare up as like an international incident. And so when we're there with them, they still have to have a bodyguard, but they can move around more freely, and they can do their work less impeded. So that was really amazing too. They went down to Nicaragua and were dismayed at what was happening with U.S. tax dollars in Nicaragua. And at the time, the U.S. government was lying about how that money was being used. They were saying it wasn't being used for weapons, it wasn't being used for militia, but in reality, that's what was happening. So they went down there, saw it with their own eyes, and they were supposed to be down there for just a few weeks. And they were like, we're not leaving. And so they set up some sort of a timetable where these people at this church, I can't even imagine doing this. But these people, this church were like, we're all going to sign up and everyone's going to take a turn, and there's always going to be someone here. There's always going to be an American presence here. And so, you know, in a perfect world, we would be down there literally all the time, and we would have an American staff. So this is one instance where we wouldn't be hiring a Colombian to do this, because the whole purpose is you need an American citizen, and what the privilege that affords to be doing that. So we would have to, you know, we have to find either a volunteer or a staff member to be down there all the time. That's how much it's needed. In reality, we really work and depend on the international partners. So there's folks who are always there in country, but they're not necessarily Americans. There's a huge Witness for Peace. It's an organization just like Witness for Peace, and it's huge. But it's based in Scandinavia, and they almost always have a presence in Colombia to witness. And then there's other parts of the world as well where there's strong. This is called accompaniment work, and so there's a strong urgency to have people accompanying these peacemakers who are Colombians who are doing the work.
So as a delegate, do you have any responsibilities other than witnessing? Like, are you tasked with spreading a message via social media or other forms of communication?
You're so right.
Like, are you just there
you're
as a body?
Exactly on the nose. You go there, and when you're there, you're just a body. Although many of us also take the opportunity to try to like take as many pictures as we can and understand the narrative as well as we can, because these are super complex issues, right? Like there's so many forces at play. There's all these like regional influencers, there's the local politicians, there's the local corrupt drug cartels, and then there's the international players. So you're just trying to like understand what's actually happening by like, you know, really engaging and talking with the folks who are doing the work. And then there's all these other like complexities. Like when we were down there was a whole situation happening locally, because they were dealing with their own issues related to LGBT people being discriminated against within their own community, like by, you know, Colombians discriminating against other Colombians because of this particular issue. So there's just like so much complexity. So you're tasked with just understanding it while you're there and being a body. But then when you come back to the U.S., you are, the goal is that you're bringing this back to other Americans so that they can understand how their economic policies, how their tax dollars, how the people that we vote into office and the way that they treat international policies, how all of that is impacting human beings in other parts of the world.
So as a delegate, I would assume that hopefully the organization pays for your travel there and back.
Yep,
Are you volunteering your time though to be there?
No.
Okay.
No, I mean,
it doesn't sound like much of a vacation.
So I'm half Colombian, and this was, you know, I was really excited to go on the delegation last year to Colombia. But yeah, this is not at all a vacation. Like we stayed in the nicest hotel in this town called Buenaventura, which is at the mouth of the largest port in Colombia, and it's where nearly all of the drugs that would leave the country would be coming out of. And the nicest hotel in Buenaventura still has literally zero hot water. Like they literally don't have hot water. It's not like it runs out and then you don't get any. There is none to start with. And it was, I think, about $22 a night, and it was what you would expect for $22 a night. So yeah, these are not vacations at all.
Did you have to use the Wim Hof
it
method
was
in order to be able to do the cold?
When I went, the cold water was not a problem when I went. But yeah, I love the Wim Hof method. I'm so glad you brought that up. I'm just learning that. I'm new to it. I didn't have that in my toolkit when I went down there last year. Yeah, it's a great app too.
There's
I
an
love it.
app for that.
Yep.
Yeah. So how often do you get to
Well,
go personally
we are
as a
running,
witness for
yeah, and
peace
if
delegate?
anyone else is interested in doing this, we are hoping to run at least 3 delegations a year going forward. And so the other countries that we are organizing, the one that we're organizing right now, and that I'm really hoping will happen by the end of the year, but it just depends on how travel restrictions are going to work out with COVID. But we're organizing a trip to the U.S.-Mexico border, but here in Texas, because there are some really serious human rights abuses happening with American tax dollars at the border everywhere, but particularly here in Texas. I think that there's a lot to witness. And so that will be an easier trip for folks who might be a little bit more nervous about traveling with COVID and everything else happening in the world. And then we'll be also planning a delegation to Cuba in early 2021, which is, we're really hoping that that one will be actually like more of a youth emphasis. And that will be for folks under the age of 25. When they go to Cuba, we've done this delegation before. We usually partner with the Martin Luther King Jr. Center that's established in Cuba, and there's just so much great education about the way that U.S. imperialistic policies have devastated the Cuban economy and essentially like put those people into a state of perpetual poverty. Because we were so successful with our international policies that restricted their trade and kept them in economic disparity.
And I would assume for the international destinations, you
No,
would need to
actually,
be
you
able
do
to,
not need to
you
be
should be
bilingual at
bilingual
all.
in order to.
Like you really don't need. I mean, it certainly helps, but there are. I mean, the whole delegation is American citizens, so everyone helps, and you're always with the delegation. You're never separated out. So, and the local staff or the local people that we're serving also help to coordinate, making sure that we get our transportation, food, and everything's already like taken care of. So in that sense, it does feel like a vacation, and in the sense that like you never have like cash on you or anything like that. Like everything's sort of like pre-arranged. If it feels
Overwhelming just thinking
overwhelming
about
because
it.
of the language barrier, that's not a concern at all. It's just more like just working up the like emotional endurance of like going and seeing the real tragedy of what's happening with some of these people.
All right. So if someone were interested in learning more about it, maybe find out more information how to apply to be a witness.
Yeah, I can send you the link, but it's just
Can you give us the website
witnessforpeace.org.
for that?
And we are the national entity. There are some regional affiliates, but I would encourage people to work with the national entity especially if they're here in Houston. But we can direct them. We can direct them to where the nearest delegation might be happening to, depending on where they are.
Well, let's talk about how you and I met. I guess we had both downloaded the Bumble app, and we were using the BFF feature on that because there are couple different modes. Because I don't know about you, but often as an adult, it's even harder to find women or just women to form a friendship with. Not just let's be Facebook friends, but actual heart-to-heart conversations where you talk about stuff that matters to you, where you talk about the stuff that hurts you and the stuff that motivates you. And so I think people who are on that app that are trying to make real connections with women who, for some women, they seem like they have reached their friend quota. Like they don't need anybody else. Okay. And that's not me. So I have not reached my meaningful friend quota. So anyway, that's how we first met. And I loved you must have put on your profile that you were a poet or that you enjoyed writing poetry, or somehow that came up in our conversation. But we had our first blind date, I guess you could say. You invited me to a So Far Sounds concert. And I had never heard about that before. So can you tell us a little bit about that and what your take on this story is?
I have not reached my friend quota. I'm new to Houston. I lived in Santa Barbara for nearly all of my life, and I moved to Houston at the start of 2019. So when I met you in May, was it May or April maybe of last year, I was still like just months into being here in Houston. And So Far was just the coolest, and it's just anyone who loves live music should just Google So Far Sounds and see if they have one in your area, because they're just these like little concerts, and yeah, I agree. It was just so wonderful to like meet another kindred spirit. I felt like you and I had shared very similar places where we had different kinds of pain in our pasts, and I think we both turned to writing. Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
I feel like we went deep, pretty deep. We went
and
pretty
especially
deep,
the
pretty
writing.
quickly.
Like I just was so excited to learn that you're a writer, and I don't remember if I knew that going into it. I feel like we discovered that on our first date. But I feel like that's the thing that has kept us connected to each other, which is just so lovely.
Well, I loved when I first I walked into where they were holding the concert. It's a very small, intimate space, and you were there, and you knew the way to my heart. You brought out food. You brought out food. I love being fed. And then you also brought out like not like one, but a couple different options of, adult beverages for us to relax with. And so I'm like, yes. And I felt like the three different artists that performed for us that evening, they were so different from each other. So you would not go to any other concert and have the wide variety that we had that evening, because I feel like there was one lady who was doing a very soulful. She had like a keyboard, only a keyboard person, keyboardist accompanying her, and it was just so smooth and soulful, and she was hitting those high notes. It was very relaxing. And then, she's followed, or maybe it was preceded by
Ryan Adam Wells, right?
This guy who was just rocking it on the guitar.
Yes.
And like
Me too.
Yes, I follow him now on Facebook and Instagram and everywhere else. I instantly fell in love with him. But he was, definitely a totally different style. And I just felt like his personality completely filled the room. And whatever he was singing about, you could feel it. Like his anger, he was like singing some songs about relationships and dropping some F-bombs and, some very inappropriate, not inappropriate, but, very adult audience centered, oriented lyrics there. And then, it ends with the final performance being a husband and wife duo who are more of, and they would not have, they definitely were not dropping F-bombs. Yeah, I think they sang some hymnals, some hymns, I mean, and you could tell that they definitely had a very spiritual connection, and that they had a message that they wanted to share. So it was a very interesting evening. And on top of everything, on top of being introduced to three very different artists, very talented art groups.
I agree.
I got to meet
and we'll have to make it
so I
to
thought it
another
was a
So Far
win
show
all the
when
way
we start
around.
up again.
is great.
They took a hiatus with COVID, but anyone who's interested in live music, go to a So Far show, either with someone or even if you don't know anybody, because it's easy to meet people when we were there. Do you remember we also met someone who was doing nonprofit work who was sitting like right in front of us? Yes, there was just like, it's just very easy to
Yes,
sit in these
y'all hit
small
it
little
off.
spaces. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
definitely bring some chocolate chip cookies because then everybody will want to to say hello.
That definitely proved true in your case. That was good.
Hmm.
So, I guess we may have found out later that we both write, and you are on
Yeah.
Instagram, and I didn't even know there was uh, a thing called Instapoet until
Yeah. Well,
after I
it's
met you.
honestly, to
And
be
yeah,
like
so tell us
completely
what
candid, it
Instapoet is.
is a way for people who are too shy to out themselves as writers to have like this alter ego as a poet. And I guess the other difference is that you're so limited with the amount of space you have in Instagram that these little poems, these Insta poems end up being teeny tiny. I mean, sometimes they're even just like 2 sentences long. But there's just a whole genre, as you know, of so many writers on Instagram who are pouring their hearts out about every single thing you can think of. And I had started doing that last year after my divorce, just because I had so much to say, but I didn't feel like it was appropriate to put it on my regular Instagram page because, I'm friends with all of my feel good students. I'm friends with, other people professionally on my regular Instagram page. And so this felt like a way to separate that out. And I actually had kept all of my like personal information off of that page until literally like the last couple of weeks was the first time that I started using my real name on that page. But I'm happy. I feel, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think this
I
is
thought maybe
certainly
you
the
were outing
biggest
yourself on
out
this
I've
podcast.
had. Because before that, yeah, I didn't. I would only share it with folks who asked, like what my name was and what my other handle was. But now I feel much more solid about where I'm at with my divorce, and I feel like I can be proud of my writing, and I can connect it to my actual real life in a different way. Poetry,
Have
no,
you
not at
always
all.
written
I'm really new to
in
poetry. I'm
poetry specifically?
yeah, but I have written all of my life, and I've always loved writing since I was a little kid. And my dream was always to be a published writer. And I know you just published your first book, and I'm just so inspired by you. It's just such congratulations. I was just so happy when I saw that, and I'm just so I couldn't be happier for you. That is definitely my dream as well.
I self-published a book of
Oh,
poems
nice.
back in 2009, and so yeah, that's still available. But I now I'm looking
Hmm.
for a publisher for the collection
Hmm.
of poems I've written since then because I've done a lot of
Yeah.
changes
Yep.
in how I view the world in the last, you know, 11 years.
Yeah.
So, sometimes it seems like a
Right.
completely different person, but I know it's not. I had to have been that person to be the person I am today. And
Hmm.
so I guess I am looking for, a more
Yeah.
traditional publisher this time around, um, hoping my stuff is good enough, to get that acknowledgement
Hmm.
from an outside source. So I'm still looking for a publisher for those poems. What you're speaking about is
Hmm.
a short story.
Oh.
It's still a little too long for a short story, but a little
Oh,
too
yes.
short to be called a novel. So I think it's actually technically considered a novelette. But
That's
either way,
awesome.
I did get that published. Right now, it's just an audiobook. Um, I'm waiting for some files from the illustrator, and
That is
then it will
so
be able
wonderful.
to
So
get released
exciting.
as an ebook and all that. But I don't mean to sound like all self-important, but when I've been asked
Hmm.
what poets I read or I get inspired by, I'm like, well,
Mm-hmm.
I honestly don't read a
Mm-hmm.
whole lot of contemporary poets. I love a lot of the fireside poets, um, but uh, I'm finding that
Mm-hmm.
changing as I just become
Yep.
uh, more aware of contemporary
Oh,
poets.
you're so
I
sweet.
am reading more of them, but I'll always mention you as well, and I'll be like, I'm like, my friend
Oh.
Maritza, she's on Instagram. She writes poetry that I feel
Mm-hmm.
like I feel inspired by it. And it may just be a sentence or two. Sometimes
Oh,
it's much
you are
longer,
so
but
sweet. You're filling my
I
heart up so much.
I feel the
Thank you.
artistry in
That
it.
is so kind.
And I don't, well, no, and that's why I had
Mm-hmm.
invited you at one point to join me in a collaborative
Yes.
effort. Um, I think I was going to
Yep.
call it the Rose Medicine Collaborative.
Yeah.
But anytime you're interested in doing something together, let me know. But I am in such awe of what you say. I don't know. Poetry is often good poetry for me is an experience. And so if I can feel myself
Mm-hmm.
transported into your shoes and feeling the shame, the anger, the betrayal, the happiness, the ecstasy, um, whatever it is, the vulnerability of being in a new relationship, if I can feel myself transported into your shoes for a brief
Oh.
moment, uh, I feel like it's a success and I love it. And I just eat it up. So I definitely follow
Oh,
you.
you're so
Continue to
sweet.
post
Thank you. I
on
appreciate that so much.
Instagram, and I
And
expect to see you
it's
published as
just
well.
we all are just going through so much. Everybody, every single human being on this planet just has this this incredible depth of experience to share, um, and when you can connect to someone in it through writing, I feel like there is just this incredible power and validation of knowing, like, oh, I'm not the only one who feels that way.
Because we think we are doing it
That's what
alone.
it looks
Like we're the
like,
only
right? It
one who's
always looks
feeling
like
this way
that to
because
other
everyone else
people.
has
Yeah. Yep,
their stuff
exactly.
together.
Oh, I so value what you've shared, April. Thank you. And thank
Mm-hmm.
you for all of your
Yeah.
creative contributions to the world. You're just doing so much. It's just so cool to see someone in bloom. And I really, really appreciate that in you. That's very inspiring to me.
Do you find yourself writing
that
in
that would be
English
interesting.
only, or do
No,
you
I
have
really only write in
another
English. I am
Instagram
fully
feed
fluent
in
in
Spanish
Spanish,
that I don't
but
know about?
I've never been schooled in Spanish at all. So if I were to write in Spanish, it would be something like a third grader's writing, I'm sure. Yeah.
And you've answered a lot
Yeah.
of this
Well, I
already,
would
but how
love
can people find out more
for
about
folks
you
to
and follow
join
what
me
you're
on
making in your own
Instagram, and
sandbox?
my handle there is the O period OMM. So it's Theo.OMM, and that's actually the one and only Maritza Mejia. That's what it stands for. Um, and yeah, yeah. Actually,
Oh, I
it is
didn't know.
it
I thought
is
maybe
like
you had like a spiritual
that's
practice
the
where you were like,
yes, the play on both, because I am
oh,
like an
I
avid
don't
yogi.
know.
I do yoga every single day.
A play on
And I
both.
love it. But yeah, the and I know I've shared that link with you. That would be the best place to keep up with me. You can probably get a window into like how I'm doing emotionally by looking at my feed. And there have been long periods where I've stopped posting just because things have either been so wonderful or so difficult. But I'm back now. I feel like I've had a creative surge in the last couple of weeks, and I have
Mm-hmm.
so many poems ready to go. So I'll be posting really regularly on there.
Okay. And then as far as Feel Good and Witness for Peace, you've
Right.
already given us those
Exactly.
websites, and so
Yeah.
they wouldn't necessarily need to
Feelgood.org
contact you
and
directly, right?
witnessforpeace.org
Just
would
go
be
to
would be
those
great places
sites.
to
Okay,
start.
gotcha.
And there's contact information on those websites for whatever they might be looking to get involved with.
All right. Our last segment is teachers. I love how in the Lifestylist
Mhm.
podcast, Luke Story ends his pods by asking his guests this question. So we're including it in ours. Who have been three teachers or
Yeah.
teachings in your life that you
I
might
love
share
this
with our
question.
audience that
So,
they could go research and
poetry,
also learn
my
from?
absolute siren is Mary Oliver, and I'm sure many people have already happened upon Mary Oliver, but I feel like I've learned so much about um, getting to know yourself as an individual spirit through the writing of Mary Oliver. I think she's just incredible.
They can just Google and
She is the one who wrote that famous line, "So tell me, what will you do with your one bold and precious life?" But she's written so many incredible other things. Um, and then there's Pema Chodron. So this is another Googleable author. Pema Chodron is the first American woman to become an ordained Tibetan nun, and she is my spiritual guru. I guess I don't think she'd like those words, but in terms of the way that I tried to live my life, she's written some incredible books. My favorite is When Things Fall Apart, which was very helpful to me during my darkest days. But Pema Chodron is definitely a huge influence on my daily life. Um, and then third, I would say, just to keep it light, Oprah Winfrey. I cannot get enough Oprah Winfrey. I love her podcast. If you don't listen to her podcast, the SuperSoul podcast is a great one to start with. I don't like the interviews with people who are like celebrities necessarily, but I listen to like well, I guess I would make Brene Brown the exception, but she's interviewed some incredible spiritual leaders, and I always just feel like I get something, even though I don't consider myself religious, I feel like I get something out of hearing from people who are very spiritual and religious, and she's just got some incredible guests. So I would say those three incredible women.
well, in your case,
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe I can allow for
I
four.
absolutely,
You said that
yes.
you practice yoga every day. Okay, that
No, I do a
what
heated
type of yoga?
Baptiste yoga
Like more of a
every day.
meditative yoga
I
or
practice with a studio here in
Kundalini
Houston
yoga?
called Big Power Yoga. They are amazing. If you're in Houston or Denver, they also have a presence in Denver. But heated Baptiste is it's not specifically meditative, but I do find myself essentially meditating the whole time, and I just love it. Usually an hour, but they do have some classes that are 45 and some that
How
are
long are
90
those
minutes.
sessions usually?
Yeah. I started regularly going like every
So how
day
long have you
going
been doing yoga?
in January of 2017. There was a 30-day challenge where they were the studio I had been going to maybe twice a week offered a like come as much as you can in the next 30 days and you'll get entered into a raffle. And so I did that and I went every single day and I was like, you know what? I need this every single day. And so since that January of 2017, I've been going every day.
Wow. Yeah, I did a recent blog post about yoga.
Oh,
I guess that's why I'm asking.
anytime you want to go,
I have
let's go
found it.
together.
I'll have to look into the heated Baptiste yoga. Um, and okay, okay. So I've been doing a virtual yoga class
Hmm.
maybe once a week, and I have found it to be very beneficial. So I'm just wondering, like, if I were to do it
Hmm.
every day, it'd probably be a little bit more of a financial
Yeah.
investment than
Yeah, well,
I'm prepared
this
to make right
studio does
now.
do like
But
a
I
like if
think
you're a new student, the first
it could
month
only
is
help.
unlimited for like
It could only help.
$40 or something, and they are doing virtual right now. So it could be a good thing to try, but yeah, long term it does take some planning financially to make sure that it works.
Do you think that even if you weren't going virtually every day, that you would be able to by now just go through
Oh
it
gosh,
yourself
I think
without
I
any
honestly could
direction?
lead
Like,
a
have you
yoga
considered
class if I
yoga,
really needed
becoming a
to,
yoga instructor
because I've been
certified?
so much. I probably would be the worst ever, you know. I mean, it's incredibly hard. I have so much respect for these yoga teachers. I don't know how to do it, but in an emergency, I think I probably could lead a yoga class. But I have kicked around the idea of being a teacher, but I feel like it's better left in the hands of the incredible teachers that I have the honor of sitting in class with.
Yeah, you definitely have a lot
Oh,
of other things that you're doing and doing well.
thank you
So
so much.
I hear you.
Oh, thank you, April.
Well,
Thank
thank
you
you,
so much. I
Maritza,
really
so
appreciated
much
it.
for joining us in Sheffy's Sandbox.
Okay, bye.
Much love.